Um, okay, cool. Our scripture for today is Mark 1:18 through 22. Okay. And immediately they left their nets and followed him. As he went a little farther, he saw James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, who were in their boat mending the nets. Immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. Ooh, that was a short one. And now for Lee.
It's always fun when the person reading scripture has so much energy. It's Starbucks, yeah. So some of you may have been confused by today's scripture reading. We've been going chronologically through the Bible. We started back at Genesis, working our way all the way through. Last week, we even picked up Maccabees to get that time between the Greek and Roman empires, between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And I told you all last week, for those who were with us, that this week we'd be getting into the life of Jesus, which may have led some of you to the assumption that today would be Christmas. So if you brought gifts, you are welcome to just leave them in the narthex. That's fine. But others of you may have assumed we would start where the Gospel of Mark starts, which is with the baptism of Jesus. But we've been covering 500 years a week for the last month. So forgive me if we skip 33 years forward and pick up some portions of Jesus' life that we don't always stop to talk about. Just so though we're all thorough and on the same page, as we've been going through our history, in about the year 4 CE, which kind of blows that myth that this is all based on when Jesus was born, in about the year 4, Jesus was born. In the city of Bethlehem, the same place as we've gone through these stories that Ruth and Naomi returned and made a home. The same place that David took his young family when he was first king until the temple and his palace in Jerusalem were built. And then Jesus and his family go to Egypt as refugees, the same place that Abraham and Sarah went to take refuge, the same place that Jacob's family is called to during a famine, the same place that Jeremiah is later taken to for safety rather than being taken to Babylon. Jesus then comes home to Nazareth, the same place his parents were from, the place his mother was sent away from as a pregnant teen for her own protection, and the place that will later try to throw him off a cliff. Jesus grows up and then does some wandering. He goes into the wilderness and faces temptation. He comes back and is baptized by his cousin John, and then he sees some guys fishing. He decides, it's time. It's time. And immediately they follow Jesus and the public ministry begins. Immediately. All that buildup, all of that context. And then here we go. Immediately. So is everyone up to speed? Everybody ready to move forward? I'm not. At least not immediately. Not immediately. Matthew and Mark use this term a lot. It's one of those words that's in Scripture. It's in Scripture a lot more often than words people preach about. Let's say that. Matthew uses it as a transition, creating a sense of urgency, heightening the tension in stories. It's dramatic effect. And it's also something that he uses to transition to the next story. And immediately they went to the next city and da-da-da-da. It's like, oh, but also. Or, oh, have I told you? Immediately, da-da-da-da-da-da. It's a transition, but with emphasis. Mark uses it more as punctuation. It's like an exclamation mark in a headline. It comes after healings. It comes after an invitation to something important. It comes after Jesus has ticked off the Pharisees and they start immediately plotting against him. Imagine it this way. The immediately in Mark is like when your mom says, go clean your room. And you stand there and she goes, now. And you might leave the room, but it doesn't mean you're necessarily going to clean your room right now. It's like when someone says, you need to get to a doctor immediately. And we might remember to make an appointment. We might put it off. We might act like we're okay. But there is an urgency to the need. There's an urgency to the emotion that's there. And that's what we get from Mark in this story. It's a literary tool. It's a storytelling tool. But it can also set us up to feel like really bad followers, right? The disciples met Jesus and immediately left everything. And sometimes we try to remember to make it to church, on time. Sometimes we remember to be a good person in the moment. Sometimes we try to remember what we're supposed to do every day to get our responsibilities met, much less being a life-changing moment immediately when it presents itself. Jesus meets the disciples and immediately they leave everything. Immediately. Maybe. Jesus has people healed and immediately they get up and change their lives. Immediately. Maybe. We know it takes a little while to live into a new reality. In our journey through the Old Testament, through the Hebrew scriptures, we've seen an escalation of the pace, right? It started out in Genesis 1, where all of a sudden there's a dizzying pace of poof, there it is, poof, there it is, light, moon, animals, people, birds, poof, poof, poof. God's so tired, God has to rest after all that. And then the pace starts to slow down. There's a transition to the pace. We go from poof, there it is, to God breathing into a person that's formed. And then the shaping of relationships. And then we get invited into those stories. And then all of a sudden, the genealogy of this family of faith starts to spread out. It starts to get gaps in the genealogy, right? Until this last month, we've been learning 500 years at a time. It's not an immediate transition, but all of a sudden, we go from this fast pace to this slow pace to God unfolding things over time. God revealing them from generation to generation. Seeing God's work working together over thousands of years of history. God's story passed down from grandmothers by cook fires, embedded in traditions and rituals and laws. God's story collected, curated the different versions of it and put together by kings and priests and teachers. And then suddenly, immediately, we're at a breakneck pace again, trying our best to keep up with Jesus. It can be intimidating, it can be exhausting. And let's be honest, how many things can you name that are intimidating, exhausting, and immediate? Okay? Intimidating, exhausting, and immediate. Maybe the birth of a baby, but there's usually a few months of preparation and warning, even if you hit that moment at the end, right? Maybe a new relationship, love at first sight. Maybe a new job opportunity, an unexpected promotion or an offer that you didn't see coming. These are the good ones, right? These are the good examples of something that is intimidating, exhausting, and immediate. More often than not, it's a bad diagnosis. It's being single again after a bad breakup that you didn't see coming. It's dealing with that friend or family member who always seems to collide with our life rather than inviting themselves over for a visit. Immediate is rarely comfortable. Immediately is rarely something reasonable. Immediately is rarely sustainable. It's very true in the church, right? I once had a friend and mentor tell me, the only thing that happens quickly in the church is trouble. My wife printed those words out and has them framed in her office. The only thing that happens quickly in the church is trouble. Growth that lasts happens over time for people and for communities. Change that really transforms happens over time. Ideas that inspire, they give hope, they take time to take root. Our church would never be as strong as we are now if we'd jumped from 15 people to 40 people in 6 months. There would have been no time for relationships to grow, no time for intimacy to be established, no time for new voices to be heard, to inspire, to lead. So why is Jesus out there recruiting with such immediacy? Look at the scripture again. Does Jesus ask them to immediately ditch their job, abandon their family, and change everything? All Jesus does is say, come and follow me. Now, he's got that really good advertising line. Hey, you fishermen, I'll make you fishing for people. He had plenty of time in the wilderness to come up with that. But the writer of the Gospels tells us a story of fishing boats, 2 fishing boats with very little detail, where something profound happened. We don't get the conversation between the brothers. We don't get the conversation between the brothers and their dad. I looked up a previous sermon I had done on this text where I actually, with you all, I guess a year and a half ago, imagined what those conversations might have been like, because we know it was longer than, see you later. We know there's conversation there. Maybe there was family drama, family conflict. Maybe there was hurt to overcome. Maybe there was a need for them to go. Maybe Zebedee was ready to kick them out of his boat. Who knows? Maybe there were family hurts. This was their chance to get away from. Maybe they were limited by their career. Maybe they hated fish. Maybe it was the only chance they were going to have for something different. But we don't get the complexity of the conversation. We don't get their conversations when they go back home with their fiancés or their wives. We don't get the conversations with their mothers. Seriously, do you think they left without mom having a voice in this? 4 Jewish boys leaving home for an undetermined amount of time with a stranger they just met? No. Mom had something to say about this. Grandma passed a story down way too many generations, kept the Sabbath for too long, taught the rules, taught the law for too long for Mama not to be in this conversation unless she's not there. But we know it's all more complex than immediately. And Jesus didn't ask for immediately. So what's in this story? Jesus offers an invitation, and then we get an exclamation point from Mark. Because something happened. Something happened in them. It may have not been chronologically at the moment, but something happened in that time, in that conversation. By that invitation, something in them changed. They may not have taken their pack, swam to shore, and left their dad in the boat, but something soon after occurred because something in them had changed. There was a certainty that could be described as immediacy. There was a certainty to the immediacy of what needed to happen for them. Mark wants us to know that the call did something in them. It changed something within them. The disciples are not following half-hearted. It's not out of curiosity. It's not boredom, and it's not a privilege trip for a bunch of young guys. Something profound happened, and Mark wants us to understand the impact. So we get immediately. Some of us have experienced a life transition in our faith, a conversion, a discovery, an awakening of something we thought we had lost. Some of us have had our faith unfold over time, slowly, methodically. Some of us are still waiting on it. Some of us have found our life's work, our purpose in a flash. We remember where we were when we knew what we were supposed to do. We remember who inspired us into that career or that vocational identity. We remember how the calling shaped our identity. Some of us fumbled into what we do with our lives. Some of us are still searching for exactly where our joy and the world's need come together. We're still looking for it. Some of us have had come to a point where what did work doesn't work, and we've reinvented ourselves. Reverend Nora Jacob was a librarian a lot of people in Orange checked. Wait a minute. She went to seminary and now she's doing ministry in the prisons? What? She was a librarian. Sometimes our lives unfold slowly, sometimes quickly. But at each stage, whether it's our first discovery or a second or third discovery of where we are in our lives, we realize something's changed, and there's an immediacy to us. There's a sense of need to do something different. There's a longing, a thriving within us that longs to get out. Being struck by lightning is not the important part of this story. It's not the snap decision. What's important is that we realize our lives are different when they change. That we realize we've changed. We discover what God has made us to be. And we figure out what it is, we know we have to do something with it before that spark dies out. We have to do something about it. We have to get out of our boat and stop bobbing along. We have to take up our work and make it our own. For some of us, it's just a matter of packing a bag and moving on. For some of us, this requires difficult conversations. For some of us, just a matter of owning what others already knew about us. Hey, friends, let me tell you about me. And they all go, duh. For some of us, it requires living into a truth that we know others will reject. It doesn't matter if it's a career, if it's a spiritual journey, if it is our identity and expression of our very being. Doesn't matter if it's our culture, our gender, our sex, or our faith. Sometimes we can share it and the world has seen it, sometimes before us. And other times it leads to conversations that you probably can't just have sitting in a boat. For some of us, faith, purpose, and our personal truth are clear. For others, it is clear as mud. Yet for all of us, the invitation remains the same. It remains the same. Whether those disciples in the boat knew who they were or they were still searching and longing for something, the invitation was the same: come and follow me. For those of us who've grown up in the church our whole life, for those of us who've given up on the church and swore we would never go into one of those again and are trying to figure out how in God's green earth we ended up in this place today. And for those of us who've never had a spiritual journey nurtured before, the invitation's the same. Come and follow. To do what? To do what? We'll dive into that more over the next few weeks. But from what we can hear in Jesus' little marketing pitch, come collect people. Build a community. Share our lives. Pass on our hopes and dreams to somebody else. Come and collect people. Build a community. Share our lives. Pass on our hopes and dreams. You may find community all around you. Where those God brings into your life, they may trickle in slowly. But you know them. And when you do, when they come into your circle, claim them immediately. You may find community all around you. Or you might find that your community is always under construction. But once you know you're a part of something, once you feel a people welcoming you in return, claim it immediately. Some of you have heard the teachings of Jesus and thought, yes, that's it. Other of you have heard the teachings of Jesus and had to wrestle, had to push back, had to ponder, doubt, debate. But once you know the promise of love is real, once you know the damnation and manipulation are from people, not from God, and once you hear and see the stories of Jesus echoed in your life, once that story claims you, enters you, embeds itself in you, once you hear and see the stories of Jesus unfolding around you, it's time to claim it. It's time to claim a community and be claimed by one. It's time to be loved and love others. It's time to share your story and share your life immediately. Immediately.